Hello and welcome back once again to part 2 of my lecture series on the foundations of bioethics. Part 2 of this series focuses on primary ethical theories relevant to bioethics. For each ethical theory, I will begin with an overview of the theory, discuss the individuals or groups who are instrumental in developing the theory, explain how the theory responds to the three big questions of ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God in ethics. I will end with a summary of the main points of the theory, along with what are generally referred to as the positive aspects of the theory and the limitations that the theory presents. Remember, all ethical theories that we are discussing in this course are still applied in practice today because they all contain a nugget of truth. However, all of these theories fall short of being normative for one reason or another. As you go through the theories, I encourage you to consider for yourself what nuggets of truth do you take from the theory, and where does the theory fall short for you? In this lecture, we will look at Kantian ethics. Kantian ethics is a form of deontological ethics, meaning the morality of an action is judged based on your intentions, specifically your duty to follow the rules. At the completion of this lecture, you should be able to summarize the foundational components of Kantian ethics, discuss how Kant's background impacted the development of Kantian ethics, describe how Kantian ethics answers the questions of ultimate reality, human nature, and God's role in ethics, explain the categorical imperative and the principle of humanity and reciprocity, and identify two positive aspects and two potential problems with Kantian ethics. According to Kant, reason is the foundation of ethics. Reason is the foundation of truth. Rationality is what allows humans to be moral beings, as rationality is what separates humans from the animals. Animals act out of instinct, and instinct only. Humans have the ability to reason, think logically, and based on that thinking, make a rational decision. This ability to think before acting is the source from which human freedom, human values, and human dignity comes. Humans should be valued because of this high level of functioning. But we also then have to take responsibility for the choices we make. Because we can logically analyze our choices, we have a duty to make the appropriate choice. And because we have this free will and this ability to rationalize and make logical choices, it is our motive or our intent why we made the choice we make that is going to determine if the choice is right or wrong, and if the act is ethical or unethical, moral or unmoral. Simply put, the moral or ethical choice is the choice that a rational individual would make in accordance with duty and logic. Therefore, the effect or the outcome of your choice is not what counts. We are not focused on outcomes here. We're focused on this motivation of wanting to act according to duty and wanting to act according to reason, not what the outcome is. According to Kant, nothing is good except reverence for duty. Kant refers to this concept as duty for duty's sake. Additionally, people should not be used as a means to an end. If we are valuing individual people because they have a higher level of functioning than animals, and they have freedom of choice that puts us above the animals, then it would be logical and rational to conclude that we are bound by our duty to consider the impact that our decisions have on others and consider how we are treating others. And when we treat somebody as a means to an end, as a way to better something, than as the person being the end themselves, we are removing the autonomy from that other person. We are taking away their freedom. In other words, We are not allowing them to be a rational being. Or in other words, we are dehumanizing them, which would be unethical according to Kant. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who lived during the Newtonian age, or the Enlightenment period. And this was the time in history where the shift had started and the focus was no longer on the church, but rather on science. And this thought, if you think back to mechanics and Descartes, and this idea that if you knew the behavior of all the matter in the world, then you could predict the future behavior of all the matter in the world, because the world operated like a machine and nothing happened by chance. Everything happened due to this natural order of the world. Therefore, Kant's understanding of ethics became grounded in the nature of the world, based on his work in metaphysics and his work in epistemology, or the study of knowledge and how the mind relates to reality. Kant wanted to understand how the mind received and processed information. He developed a concept of the knowledge of perception, which he called phenomena. And Kant concluded that the world was inaccessible to the human mind. We could not fully understand the world because things such as God and evil exceeded the limits of the human mind, the limits of human knowledge and understanding. Thus, Kant concluded that we can never really know how things truly are. We can only know how things are based on the extent and the manner in which we perceive them. And this became known as the Copernican revolution. This concept that as humans, we alter an object within our mind so that the object conforms to our understanding. We do not alter our understanding so that our understanding conforms to the object. Duties and rules are two concepts that are very important when understanding Kantian ethics. Duties and rules are not synonymous. A duty to something implies that somebody has an autonomous right to something, and therefore you have an obligation to fulfill that right. Rules tell us what we ought to do or what we should do. And there are two types of rules, which are referred to as imperatives. There is the hypothetical imperative and the categorical imperative. The hypothetical imperative occurs when a specific action is necessary to attain something else. So a hypothetical imperative is conditional, and it's based on someone's wishes or goals and the action that they need to take to achieve this wish or goal. The hypothetical imperative has no moral obligation. What you should or ought to do to achieve this goal has no moral means. You can have followed the suggestion of, quote, the best way, the quickest way, the cheapest way, whatever word you want to place in there, way to achieve this goal, but only if you want to. In contrast, the categorical imperative is a moral command. This is an ought statement with ethical meaning and must satisfy the test of reason. Therefore, what you ought to do is necessary, and it satisfies the test of reason, and what you ought to do is the same in every situation. There is no room for exceptions. And we're going to look a little bit closer into the categorical imperative on the next slide. According to Kantian Ethics, moral truth is autonomous and self-contained. In other words, truth is contained within the action itself. It is not dependent on the outcome, which one does not have control over. Reason alone is the source of truth and the foundation of ethics, and therefore reason and rationality is the basis on which right and wrong are determined. What is reasonable and rational, and in alignment with the categorical imperative, that which does not use others as an end, and that which you would want to make universal law, is what is ethical. According to Kant, humans are rational beings and therefore should be held accountable for their actions. Reason is the means to personal freedom and individual autonomy, and human nature should strive to promote autonomy. A good act, therefore, is based on the intention of the human, not on the outcome of the act. And this reason is what gives the intrinsic value to humanity. God has no place in Kantian ethics. And if you recall, Kant was living during the Newtonian era, the Enlightenment period, where there was this big push to separate ethics from God. And therefore, Kant has the foundation of ethics and the foundation of truth being reason. What might be interesting is that separate from his ethical theory, Kant does affirm the existence of God, and many Christians do adhere to Kantian ethics and find that Kant leaves room for God. While he does not place God within ethics, God can be inferred. The inability to fully understand the world, the phenomena that Kant talks about, this inability is what takes us from reason to faith and leads us to faith in God. Many of Kant's rules and understandings of the categorical imperative parallel the Ten Commandments. And right and wrong is very objective in Kantian ethics, and humans are intrinsically valued, which also parallels Christianity. So despite Kantian ethics not including a place for God, God can be inferred. The categorical imperative is a general axiom for arriving at specific moral rules that apply to everyone. As stated by Immanuel Kant, act only on the maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So if we break this statement apart, we can understand the categorical imperative. Act only on the maxim. Maxims are rules of action. There is what is behind our choice. What is the rule underlying the choice that we make? And so you have to figure out what is that rule that you're following. And then the second part is will that it should become a universal law. Do we desire for this rule that we are following to be a universal law? do we want everybody to act on this law in this same manner every single time? Because any moral rule should be able to be universalized. And so really what the categorical imperative does is it gives us a way for determining if a rule or a law should be a moral rule or moral law. Is it something that when faced with this situation, people should respond the same way every single time? The categorical imperative was created to rationally save humans from our natural tendency to favor ourselves and consider only our own self-interests. Rational individuals are bound by duty to consider the interests of others. The categorical imperative, therefore, provides an axiom through which we can consider, would we want something to be binding for all people in all situations at all times? The categorical imperative is often broken down into two principles, the principle of humanity and the principle of reciprocity. The principle of humanity states, act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. The important element here is that people should be intrinsically valued because people are valuable. Rational beings should not use rational beings to satisfy selfish needs and desires, because if this were to be universalized, that would not be rational. No rational being would want to be used to satisfy the needs and desires of another rational being. The principle of reciprocity states, always treat others as you would have them treat you. The principle of reciprocity focuses on moral law and moral rules being self-imposed, self-recognized, and fully internalized. With every decision that you make, you should be considering if you would want another to treat you in that manner. Kantian ethics is grounded in duty. Being good, doing what is ethical, is a matter of reverence to this duty. And your ethical obligation is to fulfill your duty. The other primary tenet of Kantian ethics is reason. Reason is what allows us as humans to be moral beings. Reason and this ability to make logical free will choices is what separates us from the animals and gives us our freedom, our value, and thus duty. However, we are left wondering, can we base ethics on finite human reason alone? If humans cannot fully understand the world and fully understand phenomena, can we fully determine what is rational? Moral law. Moral law meets the demands of reason and is always valid for every person in every situation at every time. According to Kantian ethics, moral law under the categorical imperative is absolute and universalized. But what happens when you have two moral laws that contradict each other? And some of Kant's moral laws are things such as you should not kill and you should not lie. But then we go back to Nazi Germany, and when people were hiding Jews in their house, do they lie and say that they don't have a Jewish person hidden in their house? Or do they say, yes, I do, and allow that person to be killed? So what happens when moral laws conflict? And then finally, the dignity of all people. Kantian ethics recognizes that people have inherent intrinsic value and that people should not be used as a means to an end, but only as an end themselves. And while we contemplate these concepts of finite human reason and contradicting moral law, we will head into our next ethical theory. In our next lecture, we will discuss religious natural law ethics, an ethical theory that doesn't just leave room for God, but is based on understanding the natural order of the universe, and that's God's truth, the source of right and wrong, is revealed to us through this natural order.